If I asked you to name a game that had retro-style graphics, managing and keeping a train running, rescuing civilians and keeping their hunger and health satisfied, surviving through hordes of evil, mutated creatures and zombie-like monsters, what would you say? Well, probably not too many games come to mind, but the one that I'm talking about today that has all these elements is The Final Station. But is this a train worth getting on, or does it end up just derailing? The Final Station is one of those games that absolutely surprised me. I didn't really know what to expect going in. It starts off a tad bit slow, but once I got a little bit into it, I was absolutely loving it. The Final Station uses sprite-based retro-style graphics, which I know are done to death nowadays, but I think they're okay in the game, even though they don't really do anything revolutionary with them. Not to spoil too much of the game story, but you play as a train conductor who wakes up for his morning routine, goes to the train station, boards his train, and is soon thrust into an adventure that involves an invasion force that is mutating and turning civilians into evil creatures and overall destroying the world around him. Many of the other trains and stations have already been infected and taken over, and your goal is to travel along the train tracks from station to station, battle all the hordes of creatures, save anybody possible, all while delivering cargo to where it needs to go. The game takes place in a fantasy otherworld setting, but has a lot of modern city-type settings to it, as well as plenty of other places that you'll get to explore, like your grass plains, your small towns and villages, your big cities, underground metro systems that are absolutely filled to the brim with the evil creatures trying to kill you, as well as some really nice snow-filled places and military bases. Your goal in each area is to find any supplies that you can, save anybody who's still alive, and get the code that allows you to unblock the track in order to get the train going again. Every station has its own code, and somebody at that station ends up having that code. Usually they have traveled far away from the post, and you have to travel all the way through the area, through many houses and buildings and sewer systems, in order to finally track down the code and the person who has it, or usually their corpse, so that you can get that code, punch it into the computer right near your train when you start off the area, and then move on to that next area. In between the stations is when you're on the train itself, and you're going to have to manage the train and the survivors on it, either by controlling the various mechanisms that are malfunctioning on the train. Every time you get on it, there's a different one of the mechanisms that's malfunctioning, and you're going to have to mess with it in a kind of little mini game, usually either mashing the X button or picking which of the things is malfunctioning and hitting X at the right times. A little bit of timing mini games, nothing really over the top or difficult by any means. But while you're dealing with that and making sure that the train doesn't end up overheating or running out of power, you also have to manage all the survivors and their stats, their hunger and their health, and they slowly decrease, sometimes more than others, as well as you may get a survivor that has bleeding status, which of course means they're gonna bleed out quicker and you're gonna have to refill their health more often. At the front of the train is your health and food supplies, which is what you ended up finding during the course of your adventuring. Food has to be found while you're adventuring or bought from one of the various stores at some of the safe zones that you get to visit. Whereas the medkits, not only can you find medkits on the field, you can also craft them in the game with the supplies that you end up finding. The same goes for ammo in the game, as you have multiple different types of ammo that you'll have to make sure that you have enough of in order to battle some of the creatures and the more difficult ones, and you can craft some of that ammo as well. You can have a maximum of 6 passengers on the train at a time, and each one, if they're able to make it to the next safe zone or the end of that particular act, you will be rewarded with either money or some extra items or something that will definitely be worth your while to make sure that they stay alive during the course of your trip. Though, you have to really micromanage that food and those medkits. Do you need it during the course of fighting, or is it better to save that medkit to make sure that you have it to heal the bleeding person on the train? Like I mentioned, the game starts off slow, with the first few areas that get you into the game and used to the mechanics of the train itself don't have any of the monsters or creatures for you to battle, but soon afterwards you will run into the monsters and you'll have to deal with them from then on. There's multiple different types, and they take, of course, different amounts of ammo, and of course their head is their weak spot. You'll have ones that you shoot and then they end up exploding, causing a blast effect that can hurt you from a big distance, as well as take out other enemies that are nearby. You'll have the smaller creatures that lunge towards you and try to bite you, ones that try to hug you and bite you while they're attached to you. Besides your guns and the ammo that you also have a fist, which is very useful. You can not only punch constantly, but also charge up the fist for a more powerful punch that can knock out enemies, as well as destroy certain walls so that you'll be able to get through certain areas. The guns work with a twin stick shooter type of shooting, where you'll have to aim with the right stick and fire with the R2 button. Not necessarily my favorite control scheme for this, and it's a little bit finicky and took some time to get used to, but once I learned how to manage that as well as the fist, I was knocking down and destroying monsters left and right. I have to say that the game has some pretty suspenseful moments, as you don't have a lot of health at your disposal before you end up kicking the bucket, and anytime you open a door, you don't know what's going to be inside that door the first time going through, so you may open the door and there's nothing but a couple little bit of supplies. The next door you open up, here comes a monster barreling towards you, trying to take a chunk out of your face, and you have to be ready to either fire the gun or be ready to punch them directly in the face. And let me just say that punching enemies in the game is very satisfying. The whole thing kind of like shakes a little bit and definitely feels like you're delivering a hit to these big monster creatures, and makes punching things actually really fun to do. The game is broken up into multiple different acts with several stations in each act, so you'll complete a bunch of stations and then kind of make it to the safe zone. You get a little bit of a breathing room, as well as be able to resupply yourself. You not only, of course, get the money from the survivors that you save, you also can scavenge for money randomly throughout the course of the levels itself, and then spend that money to either buy more ammo, get some gun upgrades, as well as be able to buy some supplies. But there's always a limited amount of the supplies that you're going to be able to buy at one time. So even if you have a lot of money, the vendor itself may only have 2 med kits or 2 pieces of food for you to purchase. Playing through the final station took me about 4.5 hours. Thankfully, the game's relatively lenient with its checkpoints, so once you get into an area and you fought a few hordes of monsters, it usually saves you, so if you end up dying, then you can reset back to that previous point. You keep the same amount of health that you have when the checkpoint was activated, but still it allows you to do that instead of having to redo the entire station over again from the beginning. From the technical side of things, the game didn't crash on me, didn't run any slowdown, glitching, freezing, or anything like that. I'm not a big fan of the whole sound design. There's a lot of like empty sound, like no music, and a lot of ambience, but there is some good sound effects mixed in with the gunfire and the punching of the enemies itself. The final station is available for $14.99 on the PlayStation 4. It unfortunately does not have a full trophy list, so there is no platinum. Big disappointment, because I really did enjoy my time with the game. It is a little bit short. Like I said, 4.5 hours is what it took me to get through my initial playthrough of the game, but I will have to replay if I want to try to get those trophies for keeping all the survivors alive from station to station. I was honestly surprised by this game. I had no expectations and no idea what I was getting myself into, but I actually had a lot of fun with it. In the end, I'm going to be giving the final station an 8 out of 10. But anyway, guys, that's going to wrap up this review. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.